Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. Thank you for joining me, Stephanie. It's really nice to be chatting with you today.
Yeah, likewise, Carly. I'm super excited to be here.
One of the first things that popped up for me when I was reading about the work you do is wondering if veganism or a love for food and culinary arts came in, like who came in
What came
first?
first?
Yeah, where did we go?
For me, it is definitely an intertwined experience.
Mm.
When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. Both my parents worked, and I think that's where I got my workaholism from. So I know where at least it came from. But so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and they grew a lot of produce. We particularly had a lot of raspberry bushes, so we would harvest them and then sell them on the side of the road. Nothing better than teaching a child the economy of how to sell things at 8 years old than through raspberries. But I really loved helping them. And
Grow up
in Connecticut. Yeah.
Okay.
I grew up on the East Coast, and really, I love the East Coast still. I'm in the Midwest now. I'm in Northern Kentucky, which is a beautiful area as well. Never thought I'd move to the Midwest ever in my entire life. And that's also probably a story that we could talk through, but
Okay.
We'll put a pin in that one. But so I grew up in Connecticut. We were growing a lot of raspberries, and it was really great people would stop off the side of the road, buy raspberries. It was the hospitality 101 before I even knew what I was doing. And I just really enjoyed helping my grandparents and really being connected to the land and kind of getting to experience what fresh produce is and how it feels. And my dad had some raspberry bushes at his house too. And I just remember as a little kid, like harvesting it, and I would find little baggies to put the raspberries in. And then I decided to do experiments with it where I'd put it in my backpack and bike around the town to see if it would macerate the raspberries, and then I'd freeze it.
This is amazing.
I was such a weird kid. But I was playing. And I think that's the thing is,
Yeah.
when we think about our childhoods and how we played, I think says a lot about what we then find meaning and passions for future in our adulthood.
I think we're all weird kids and we lose it. I'm trying to reconnect to some of that weirdness. I'm like, no, I'm giving in.
Yeah, I heard this saying from, I was probably on social media, but it was like, in your 30s, basically, you return to your teenage antics and your childhood passions that you tried to run away from in your early 20s. And I'm like, I think there's some validity there. I definitely think there's a lot to be said about that. Society pushes us in a lot of different directions, and I think each of us struggle with that in a different way. And I think reconnecting with who we are and what our passions are and what fuels us as humans, not just financially, I think is something that we all have to rectify at some point. And that's really difficult. I'm glad you get to reconnect with your inner weird child. I think that's the best thing.
Yeah. I think we could all use some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Biking around, wondering if your raspberries will macerate in your backpack.
Yeah.
As one does.
As one does. So I played with food a lot. I remember when I was a little kid, I used to have one of those Hasbro grills that made sizzling noises. And it was my favorite toy. No idea why. I know why. But so there are little things like that throughout my childhood that really connected me with food. My mom's a big foodie too. So we used to go to restaurants and compare and contrast ingredients together. And so that was a big part of my childhood. My first other food memory besides my raspberry adventures was actually this carrot cake from It's Only Natural, which is still a restaurant in Connecticut. It's vegan. But when I was a kid, I had no idea. It was just the best carrot cake that I ever had.
Yeah.
And I didn't find out until I was in my teens when I had gone vegan that, oh my gosh, they're vegan. Like I can still have that.
Going back for more carrot cake.
Yeah, exactly. They still make really great carrot cake. It's been probably a decade since I've been there, but they're still a really thriving business and they're really great people. So it was a fun food memory that meant a lot to me as a little kid for one reason. And then as I went through my own food journey and my own food identity, I got to reconnect with it in a very different way. So that was really magical. I definitely would say that part influenced how I
Yeah.
ended up in the realm of plant-based foods and understanding what that meant to me, and what it still means to me. But as a kid, I also had an imaginary school, so it should have been no surprise to me that I ended up in like higher education, the path that I ended up taking. But I was a weird kid, and I'm happy to say that. I think I'm still a weird kid.
I love it. I just love that you're like this connection to food. We don't look back, or we don't know it in those moments, right? At
Yeah,
hindsight, but I just love that you're able to be like, I loved food. It
yeah.
intrigued me. I wanted to know more. I wanted to do experiments with it. And to be able to say all of that and see that you're working in that industry is so beautiful.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have connections like that if we sit and think and try to tease things out. A big part of it for me, as well as I was getting older, I was still in my childhood, but aging as a child, of noticing how food connects people and what that
Mm.
interconnection can mean to individuals as well as cultures and societies. So that became a big part of my life as well, because I was just curious about it, and that's how I ended up connecting with people. And that's really how I ended up stumbling into veganism, was because I was looking at our food systems and a little perturbed by agriculture and really what it meant for us as humans, both from an
Mm.
environmental standpoint, but from a health perspective. The fun kind of side of me teasing out these complex issues as a 14-year-old was I also was playing ultimate frisbee, and one of my classmates who was also training with me was like, why don't we go vegetarian? It may help us with our athletic performance. I was like, sure, that sounds like a great
Ahead
idea.
of your time.
Yeah, so we took bets who could be vegetarian longer.
Teenagers, I love it.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And really, it was serendipitous that they happened around the same time, where I was grappling with our food system is in disarray. A lot of it's globalized. Nothing has really great nutritional value anymore. You're feeding everybody ultra processed foods. Like, what is going on?
At 14, you were having these questions. I love that. I was like, oh my gosh, does that boy like me? And am I making the volleyball team? Not to discredit my experience at all, or like,
No.
I'm just laughing because I'm like, wow, those questions did not come for a while.
Right.
Where was that awareness coming from at 14?
That's a really great question. I was always a really introspective kid. And like my parents, I think, always had conversations with me like I was an adult, which
Mm.
I don't know if totally framed it this way or made it that way. But like I remember my dad was driving me somewhere, and we would just have random conversations about theology. Like, I went to a Catholic school as a
Mm.
little kid, so we would have complex, deep
Yeah.
discussions about what it means, what religion means to people, and how there are different
Wow.
ways to express faith and things like that. For me personally, nowadays, I'm much more spiritual, and the fact that things connect us. And I am definitely not Roman Catholic by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm really glad that was a part of my identity and how I grew up. But I think having conversations like that with my parents probably pushed me to think in different ways. I was also the type of kid that wanted to be on my own and be in college by the time I was in middle school. So I think I naturally pushed myself intellectually to think about things far beyond what I probably should have been grappling with, because it definitely led to a lot of existential crises, which it's not healthy either. So,
Yeah.
it was a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways. I will definitely say that.
Yeah, and it makes me think too how much more common it is in 2024 for
Mhm.
14, 15, 16-year-olds to have the knowledge. Like, I'm so
Yeah.
inspired by young generations right now that are saying fuck off to these systems in ways that I
Right.
would not have had the language for. And
Right.
it's cool, and it's also like devastating because I'm like, you're having to do that.
Yeah,
Balance.
it's such a dichotomy, because nowadays, yes, this information is everywhere. You can find deep, disturbing information at your fingertips, which can be really great for consumer knowledge. But it also, if you don't know how to A, critically analyze it, and B, cope with it, how do you find a path forward without being like, we're all like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what are we doing? Especially from an environmental standpoint. Like, I that is a really difficult and heavy topic for any one of us who's living on the
Yes.
earth right now. And I think I'm in a very similar boat where I'm fascinated that kids and teens are definitely having much more complex conversations because of the information that they have at their fingertips, but they're losing out on childhood in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, and being able just to be human.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating. Like we had a pre-internet time. We
Yeah.
weren't connected in the same way, and we had one computer that was at the library for a while and then one computer at the home. It was not
100%.
ubiquitous. It was, I got my time when somebody wasn't on the phone and yelling through the AOL noises. So
Yes, 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 yes.
so it's just like our access to information was so different, which, it does make me wonder, where are we headed with this type of information? Like how do we manage that literacy and be able
Yeah.
to discern what to do with it and what it means for us personally and for the people we care about? But yeah, I am very thankful I grew up in the time period that I grew up. But I think it's amazing and wonderful that we also have a different scope of knowledge
Yeah.
these days.
Well, and it sounds like you were already and that trajectory, right, of being the 14-year-old who's, wow, these food systems are not helping our earth and our health very much. So you took a bet at
Yeah.
14 to be vegetarian.
Yeah, and it only lasted a couple months before I went totally vegan, because I was just reading more. And while animal-based production has a lot of scary elements to it, I'm not saying all animal production. I've worked on organic farms since then, and I've learned about regenerative agriculture, which was definitely not something in my teens that I read about, where there are ways for people to be very mindful about processes. And if that's something that somebody feels good about consuming, it's everybody's prerogative to eat the foods that they want to eat and be able to find a way to contribute environmentally and from a health perspective and any other perspective, whether or not that's religious or spiritual or personal preferences and choices, you name it. We all make the food decisions every single day that are deeply intrinsic to our identity. So this is the path I took, but it doesn't mean that's the only path. But yeah, so I went vegetarian short period, then went vegan pretty quickly. I never really liked dairy as a human being. It never was something, like, cheese is great, but like I was never a milk drinker. This is not something that I grew up with, like maybe with cereal. So it was very easy for me to actually make that dive. I will say, in full transparency, during that time, I was definitely going through an existential crisis and what life means and why am I here? And that did spiral for me a little bit. So I definitely struggled with an eating disorder at the same time that I was transitioning to veganism. And vegan foods were not common at that time. We didn't have the same type of food market or availability in general. Like restaurants, you may get like the steamed vegetables or like the side salad with oil and vinegar, and that's what you got. Like the sad pasta with like olive oil and nothing else. It narrowed what I was able to eat on my own accord because I was still a teenager. I was at a boarding school by that point, which was phenomenal. I really appreciated that educational experience I had, but like the access to food drastically changed for me overnight because of personal choices. Along with my sort of spiraling, I was running aggressively
Sounds
for
like
Ultimate
mental
Frisbee.
health.
Exactly. And so while veganism has been a really great thing in my life and having plant-based foods be a central part of why I feel good, it did have a pendulum for me personally, especially in my teenage years, where I got a double whammy of both mental health and then also not having great food access to foods that I felt I could eat. So it really impacted me physically and mentally for at least a couple of years. And then I got out of it, but it's a long road.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think some narratives, we don't have to spend too much time on the trolls of Instagram, but there's some of those blanket responses or kind of criticisms of plant-based eating and or veganism, which that's fine.
Yeah.
But sometimes people bring up eating disorders with plant-based eating without bringing any nuance into what other factors are there, what any sort of change in diet can do, and all of these things. And it gets really scary to equate plant-based eating and eating disorders. So I appreciate you bringing in that nuance in terms of your own experience, because that is a scary connection that people throw around.
Yeah, absolutely. And regardless of the diet that any one person chooses at any point in their life, there's a way to potentially do it healthy, and then there's a way to do it very unhealthfully. And there is definitely folks like you're saying that associate specific diets to specific mental health disorders or behaviors. And I'm sure it's coming from a place for most folks where that's what they saw or experienced. So that's what they associate. However, that's not the case by any stretch of the imagination for most. It's just not. There's a lot of complexities in all of our lives. I'm a firm believer that every person is going through at least one struggle that nobody else knows about. And it's really difficult to be like, oh, you're that vegan, or you're the vegan, so of course you're blah, 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 which is just so reductive, and it can be incredibly jarring for the person on the receiving end. So when I went, oh gosh, it totally can. I went through culinary school as a vegan, and I went through a very traditional culinary school.
Was that right away?
So we spent 6 months up in Maine. It's called a Maine Coast Wonky, and it was really great. We were studying ecology, and it was a really magical time in my life where I felt like I was finally able to find the independence and freedom that I was longing for as a teenager, and need to work on the attached organic farm. So we were heavily involved in caring for the animals, harvesting food. And then we also had our own communal kitchen. It was staffed throughout the week, but on the weekends, we were left to feed everybody. I naturally leaned into organize the brunch for Sunday and working through that. And so I love that experience. And at that time, I was teen, and I wasn't totally committed to being a chef. Like, I'd thought about it, but like, it wasn't, I was like, I'm still in this liberal arts vibe. And I don't,
it feels like one of those ones that's a cute dream, but I don't know, like people become chefs, like
exactly. I'm like, maybe a restaurant, but I don't know if I wasn't like, I'm chef. So
capitalism makes us think business is like
everything.
The route, where you're like, I couldn't cook the food, but I could own the place, the food.
So I got back to my goal and realized high school wasn't for me. So I left a year early and ended up small liberal arts college called Simon's Rock in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Lovely, lovely school. They do some really awesome work on helping students who are ready for college but may not be a senior yet. So they really focus on that sort of student population. And I was just there for a year because I started working in a restaurant on the side, and it was called Allium. I don't believe it's open anymore, but they were farm to table based, super small place, 60 to 70 heads a night. And I was the unpaid intern, but I really loved my time there. The team was really awesome at showing me really foundational skills and helping me build that from a professional standpoint. And I was talking with the sous chef that was there at the time, and he was like, have you considered going to culinary school? I'm like, yeah, I've been teasing around the idea, but it was one of those conversations. And he went to the CIA, the culinary stuff. You might want to look at the program. There's also a couple other ones. So he gave me sort of a list to look at. And so I applied to the CIA along with actually some business schools in the UK. And I got into some of those schools, but I realized, heck, I really should be in the culinary industry. So I transferred after a year.
But you plant-based and vegan, which is probably not the average.
No, I was known as at the time.
Of course.
I'm sure it can only imagine. I'm not been on campus in quite a long time at this point, but a lot of the faculty are cool with it. They like one of our faculty members, Shirley Chang, who's now retired, phenomenal chef and educator. She would integrate like, hey, you could use any protein to make this dish. Here are the base sauces or base components. You can do it with tofu. You could do it with tempeh. You could do it with chicken. So she was really great at highlighting it for all of the class, not just like setting me aside and, hey, this is what we're going to do.
Because then everybody's
Exactly. And at the time, a lot of my classmates I'm like, I photosynthesize. What do you do? What do you think I do? So actually, I'm good. The salad bar, good. Why aren't you different nowadays? The CIA does some really plant-forward foods in general. Like they're much more encompassing these days. But it was different, wild at the time for anybody consider that lifestyle and to be a chef at the same time.
Right.
And I wasn't there to like promote my propaganda, which many times were like, so what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to cook for other people. And I know not every vegan would be comfortable with that. because it was still working with animal products. I will say the meat fabrication class was very challenging for me, just the tactility and it would not be for everyone. And it's one of the reasons why Escoffier has a plant-based program, doesn't use animal products, so that students who do want to have professional training and understand the techniques that every dish is founded on can do that and not
without that experience.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also really vital for people to have options when education and what's going to make sense for them and their career and their life and everything that encompasses them. But I will share one funny story of when I got onto campus. I met with one of the deans to find out where I could eat on campus, because I wasn't just going to lay out on the lawn and figure it out. Yeah. Conversation started and walked me through what kitchens were open when, and I could reach out to the chef instructors that were running that meal period and ask if they can make a vegan version of what they were doing. So that was all fine and dandy. But of course, conversation ended with, so how are you going to taste? Because you can't possibly do this without tasting everything, which I think from a chef perspective is somewhat of a logical conversation to have, because palate development is a big part of producing food. That being said, would they ask the same thing from somebody who's either allergic to ingredients or is kosher or halal? Yeah. Wouldn't say that.
Right.
You just wouldn't ask them.
Right.
You want somebody to know.
You'd respect that boundary.
You would respect the boundary, and there was no boundaries to be had. I think at one point food was even brought up, like, oh, you could taste it and then spit it out.
What year is it? Like, the word spittoon. I'm sorry.
It's just the vision that came to my head when it was like, you could taste and spit it out. I'm like, do you not understand?
Like a cartoon.
Yeah, I was like, A, I'm not going to carry around a spit bucket. That's wildly disgusting. And B, from a sanitation perspective, do you not have surf safe? What is going on? The other thing that I was like, do you not understand how digestion works? It starts in the mouth. It's not.
Also, I think you're not understanding like the reasons I made these choices, right? Plant-based health. And if you're using the word vegan, there's a bigger level doing this for these oppressive systems. And so even putting it in my mouth is a problem.
Exactly. I'm like,
kind of it.
Yeah. And I was trying to be very delicate. I have a moral stance it for me personally. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to work with it. And so I just walked away from the conversation. Thanks for your time. But I shook from that conversation for quite a while. I'm just like, I know I will be fine here, but I am a little disheartened by the lack of ability to a different perspective, which is just a little jarring. But I had some really great faculty members who were super open about it and really willing to teach me everything that I was interested in anyway. And it really didn't stop them. I went classmates that we used to do family meal food for ourselves and sit down and enjoy that service. So it's very similar to actually being in the industry, but we would do that for classes. And there were a couple times where people would kind of lace with certain animal products, I will say that was probably the most difficult thing for me. I understood admirers and chefs that were there being like, you're the weird vegan, all right, whatever. But I did not expect that from clients, because it's like we were all there to learn.
And supposedly.
Yeah, you would think. I was one of the youngest people in my cohort. I was mostly with career changers who were in there, and I was the 18-year-old. So interesting.
You're a young woman who is vegan. So those things together, you had a sign over your head that was like, bother me.
Make my life up. It was a trying time in my life where I tried to not let it affect me personally, because it clearly was not something I did to other people, because I wasn't like, hey, you eat that. Like, it's your prerogative to eat whatever you want. And I'm here to learn everything that you are here to learn. And I'm not making a fuss about it. But apparently my existence. So
I'm sorry you had that experience. I know that you've moved through it, and I'm sure it doesn't affect you in the same way.
Yeah.
But that's terrible.
Yeah. But the thing is, I think a lot of people who choose to be vegan or choose to do something that's not traditional, unfortunately, have to experience similar things. And I am hopeful that at some point in society, we will get to the point where we can respect other people's decisions and support them as people. But people were either misinformed or unwilling to see different perspectives and let what impact them personally go places they should sometimes. But I think we too, and it shapes us to be wiser and hopefully not more hardened, to understand where our boundaries are and understand what we need to let go for our own mental sanity and health. I is
I'm curious because you at 18 we're going into this space like I love food and I'm committed to veganism
Mhm.
and an interest in the environment and food insecurities, food systems.
Right.
Were others coming in with that agenda as well, or was that a little unique too?
I didn't find that we're super interested in the same topics that I was. The sustainability and environmentalism was absolutely still even a thing then. I would say probably not as nuanced. It was more of, I want to have a farm to table restaurant.
And that solves it.
And that solves it. And that's good.
Yeah.
And that's a really important part. I'm not discrediting that by any stretch of the imagination, but I find that everything or any system that we have in our sense of reality is wildly complex, and there's not one thing that's going to solve it.
Intersectional.
Yeah, intersections everywhere. But just being vegan may not be enough either. It's depending on what type of food you consume or how you consume them. And that's where when they're looking in at vegans, like, oh, you think you're solving everything. Is no, that's not true by any stretch of imagination.
No, I'm actually acutely aware of all the shit that's not working because of this.
it's and folks who do lean into vegan, it's not just food, it's clothing, it's byproducts, it's the cleaners in your house, it's a lot of other it's everything. And that is, think about how many we consciously make in a day and then trying to be conscious of everything that happens behind the scenes. It is so convoluted and complex, and there's no one right answer for any of it at any point in time, which I think for some folks leaves us in this position of, I'm powerless, I might as well just give. But at the same time, there are where, hey, I can't let them just drain me by constantly thinking about everything, but at least I can make certain conscious decisions that help me feel like I'm contributing and helping and taking care of what's meaningful to me in a positive way. And it's hard to find that balance. It's hard to find where you want to rectify choosing bananas over eating local apples. It's just, it's complicated. So
I just interviewed someone that I think you will appreciate, Lauren Ornella's Food Empowerment Project.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Are you familiar with them?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What you're saying makes me think of my conversation with her. She is an activist and a vegan, also similarly since high school, and had a very early awareness. And that organization does a lot of the like food systems conversation from a vegan standpoint, but also says, here's what chocolate to not support because of this industry. And here's this. And I just appreciate that they bring in that collective liberation standpoint and use it in all of those systems and blow that out of the water, right? Not just because I'm vegan, I think I'm like crushing it, right? There's so many things. And that organization does a really cool job of bringing in all of it at the same time.
And we need more people to work because it's so difficult as individual consumers to navigate all of that information of thinking about trying that chocolate. It's not just how it was grown. And that's really difficult for individual consumers to parse or understand what labeling requirements look like and how do you make that ethical decision. So deep, we have more people doing work like that and working with very diverse communities because it's going to look different everywhere. I know we talked from like an agricultural standpoint, but then we also think about the health element of even food systems. And folks, that's why for me, one of my research components for my doctorate was food insecurity in higher education, because you think about higher education, like that's where people are trying to better themselves and improve their career outcomes and financial outcomes. And yet we've normalized the whole like broke college student couch surfing. I'm going to eat ramen and pizza and be fine.
It's supposed to be like funny. Good luck surviving that whole broke part.
Exactly. And college students these days, yes, we still have a large percent of students leaving high school and going to college right away, but we have a lot of folks returning to college later in life, either as a second attempt or the first time ever. And now they're financially independent. They may have children or be caring for other folks. They may be working 1 to 2 jobs, if not more. There's just so more that our students are trying to juggle and also be academically successful while also being broke.
And it's people in these positions that you're like, no, we really want these people to get educated and continue to help making better, and not even they can, what's wrong here?
Right, exactly. And it's, if you cannot afford, don't have a choice of what food you can consume. And that's a terrible position to be in. really, I think, like I've mentioned, food is a foundational part of our identity, and I think is a
Yeah.
basic human right, and really in a lot of ways from a systems perspective to be able to support basic human needs, not just food, but and access to healthcare. And we could go down that road, but I'm sure
Yeah.
we could
Yeah.
put up.
We're both like,
Exactly. It's challenging to really struggle with that on a daily basis, and that's a terrible position to be in. And we need more folks trying to do work to help empower communities to be able to grow foods in urban environments, or be able to find ways to make access to healthcare easier, or even just feminine hygiene products. I should just say hygiene products in general. And our system is broken in a lot of ways. So.
Have you seen the documentary They're Trying to Kill Us by John Lewis? He's known as Badass Vegan on Sandia.
I haven't seen it. Heard a lot about it, but I haven't seen it yet. I definitely think I need to check it out.
Yeah, just talking about that health perspective and that systems perspective of that systematic abuse of people of color with food deserts and access to food and people's socioeconomic backgrounds and all of it, right? And that perspective, I think, is really a continued conversation, and I'm so glad that he pushes that forward, talking about health in certain communities and saying, I'm talking about how youth is being systematically abused because you can't even make the right choices because you're not being allowed to make the right choices. Like you're being used game and it's costing you your
exactly. And that, like, of health is such a wildly challenging concept to bring to light, because I think all of us have it's just a fact of being human. And it's neat to hear when folks are like, if they just ate better, or like doing that thing like that, when many people do not have control over where they live, what access they have, their financial stability is not within their own hands in a lot of ways. Their safety, exactly. There's just so many things that deeply impact somebody's ability to be healthy that are fundamentally and systematically removed from their rights, which puts me at a loss for words. And typically I'm not at loss for words, but it's enraging on so many levels, because no wonder why people are caught trapped in a cycle loop where their health and generational health has been abused and used. And we have to fix that somehow. I think it has to be a collective attempt at fixing small elements to it, because it is one thing after another. It's a cascading effect. And we really need to do better for other people. So
to shift from that to more of the plant-based foods. I would love to hear a little bit, because I see when I read about the work you're doing and I see the food you put together, I just love seeing people that love food and that love to create, because I am not a creator. I thought when I went vegan and started posting on social media, that meant that I had to be like a recipe developer, and I thought I was doing it wrong. And then I was like, oh no, that's not anything that you do or even enjoy. You let somebody else tell you what to make, and then you have fun with it. But I just love seeing people be able to say, I'm going to use this beautiful fresh ingredient like a raspberry from my yard. So what is lighting you up about plant-based food lately?
Fresh ingredients that are locally sourced still really excite me and make me thrive as a chef. I do some recipes for one of our local edible magazines. It's Edible Ohio Valley. And we always try to just focus on what does the area produce and how can we make really beautiful nutrient-dense dishes. I make all of them vegan, and hopefully nobody's missing anything from it, because they're complex, but also simple enough to reproduce at home. And one of the dishes that for our summer magazine was with a salsa verde. You can do so many different versions, and it just so happens to be vegan. And that's the way I really like to approach veganism, is that it's really good food and it just so happens to be vegan. Like the point is that it's really good food that nourishes you. You don't have to put a label on it to enjoy it. So tamales during the summer, because there's so many different sauces and different combinations that you can have with it. I love doing different salsas. So We're not in raspberry season yet, so I'm not super stoked
We're
just
waiting.
yet.
I'm in Minnesota too, and I'm in northern Minnesota, so we get a late window, and
it's like that little halo. But strawberries they go in and out, and especially with the heat that we have right now in northern Kentucky, we definitely have. During the summer, it's definitely forward than anything for me. But like late summer into eggplants and like heirloom tomatoes, just because there's so many different things that you can do. It's always so funny to me. Some people find it very divisive of it's too bitter, but have 9 different varietals of eggplant. It's not just the eggplant that everyblant makes eggplant part with, which is delicious.
Like the emoji.
Exactly. We're not just talking emoji. And there's just so many different dishes you could do. An eggplant has got this beautiful miso brown butter glaze that you can put on it and charl it until it's nice and unctuous. There's just so many cool things with eggplant because of the texture that I really love working late summer. So I'm very seasonally dependent. When people are like, what's your favorite dish? I'm like, it really depends on the season, who I'm cooking for. You got to give me more. I saw that
on your bio. Favorite meal depends on I was like, I get that. Not as a chef, just as is it soup season? Is it?
Exactly. And I think that's the thing is food can be very basic environment. Who are you eating with? Are you feeling super well? Do you need a dish that fills your soul? What are you yearning for? That's the dish you should have. That being said, obviously, if we want to go back to the whole food systems equity standpoint, but if you do have that privilege, then go for it. Our bodies tell us a lot naturally. And I think that's something that I had to learn a lot, especially coming out of that eating disorder, was how do I fuel my body in a way that I feel well in my entity? And what does that mean? And how do I know? Because it's not something we teach our kids. We teach other people how to mindfully eat and sit in our existence and feel comfortable. What does that feel like? What does that do mentally to us? And so for me, that's a big part of eating as well, is what's going to nourish me physically, but also emotionally and mentally. So question for me to answer, many different ways for me to approach it. But if we wanted a straightforward answer, I'd say summertime, it's tamale season for me.
What would you say to folks who are maybe still explore plants and less animal products on doing just from the food standpoint that transition?
Yeah, I think the best way to approach it, at least from my perspective, there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but I find that a lot of times people are like, oh, I have to give up. It's always giving up something. It's not, which is understandable, because if it's something that's been foundational to how you've always eaten, I totally get that. Or I'm missing out on these family memories or X, Y, and Z. So I respect that. What I like to do is focus on how do you introduce more plants? So you're adding to, not detracting. And that way, for a lot of folks, what you can do is just continue to add more veggies, more whole grains, legumes, pulses to transition out the meat. So it's a natural progression rather than, oh, we're done. I did that because I'm learned and I'm that type of person. I don't think it's wildly sustainable for a lot of folks, and it's probably not the best emotionally and physically for a lot of people. So I would say slow transitions, adding more foods in that you can learn to love, because a lot of people may not have grown certain vegetables or certain grains. And that's an amazing opportunity to expand your palate and expand what you think is possible to consume and cook. But it's also challenging, like our habits.
Yes.
We're good at habitual nature. It's what humans thrive in. So it's difficult to be like, you're going to try a brand new dish this week. That's great. I would stick to a dish, not go, hey, I'm going to try 7 new meals this week. You will burn out. Don't do that. It is not feasible from a sustainability, just existence perspective. So I would say slow, add more. That's the way I would approach it.
No, that's great advice, because everyone is on a different journey, and people have so many inroads to veganism, which I love because of its interconnectedness with literally everything. But when I came in from plant-based food, and then the dominoes fell, and here we are for collective liberation. And in the beginning, it was, wow, I, like many others, are lactose intolerant, and I feel bad, and I'm going to keep going. And then I was watching grandparents go through dementia and learning about brains and and I was just like, plant-based food, and then continued on. But it took a little bit of a transition. And although, of course, from my other perspectives of animal liberation and the environment, I want everyone listening to do everything I want right now. However, I know that's not the case. And what I really want when I step back is for people to make choices that long-term keep them in the game.
Yeah.
versus what I sometimes try to do, which is what if I did everything right now in one moment and then
Mhm.
made myself feel nuts?
Right. Exactly. It's
And
just not,
that doesn't work.
no, it doesn't. I think a lot of times we as humans like to think that if we do everything all at once, we're like we've got all this energy and momentum and it's going to be great. And I'm going to brand new person. And it's unreal. And it's difficult because I think it's all well and good intentions. And that's so I think you need to step back from our own egos and go, okay, what is going to help me, like you said, in the long run? And I think that's a beautiful thing. Whole foods, plant-based eating is that it really can help you long term doing small incremental changes. So you get
Yeah.
to a point where that is your life. But it's like going to the gym. You're not gonna be like, I'm gonna be a bodybuilder, do that overnight. A, you're probably gonna hurt your B. Will you want to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning every single day? Because that may not work for you. So maybe not
Yeah.
commit to that one thing.
Which I so appreciate. We can talk so much about systems and all the interconnectedness. When people hear about that, so maybe someone's okay, I'm already plant-based. Thanks for the great advice, but I've done that. I've done and dusted.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm interested in these systems that we're hearing about and how my
Mm-hmm.
food is connected to all these other issues. What do you tell people in that way of like, how do I do something? How do I affect that? I know I'm
Yeah.
plant-based and I'm vegan and I'm trying with my everyday actions, which not to belittle, but if someone's, oh,
Right.
food systems are really lighting up, this is an
Right.
inroad in for me to do
Mm-hmm.
more. What do I do?
That's a really great question. Honestly, I think, and this is everybody has to find their own balance with this, but I highly recommend getting to know locals in your
Mm,
area because a lot of people, oh, I only eat organic, which I understand. Organic labeling, there's a lot of really great practices around organic farming, and I commend that. However, there are a lot of farmers that can't afford the licensing, and you may find that there are a lot of really great local producers that are working really hard to create really beautiful, nutrient dense dishes or ingredients that just cannot afford that and may actually be doing
yeah.
processes on their farm that are even more than what you would find just from the organic labeling. So I think that's a really big thing for me personally is like getting to know who grows the food around you and supporting them because that's your local economy. It's a really great way
Yeah.
to impact a lot of through your dollars. That being said, times to talk to farmers, search on top of everything that everybody is doing in their lives. If you don't, I really like to look at information and spend my
Same.
life digging into things. But honestly, just if you have a local farmers market that pops up
Mm,
during the summer, once a week, just stroll around, connect with people. It's a really great way to find out who's local in your community. Also, see what's actually local or seasonal for your area. Maybe you buy something there. That way, too, in my area, really awesome produce perks program that goes on SNAP, supplemental
nice.
nutrition for folks who don't know what that acronym is. And it's a really great way for folks who do leverage supplement their food abilities. Perks allows them basically to buy more produce with less kind of points or half the
Lovely.
points, which really great way for people to get more food for less money. And
Yeah.
it also then helps local growers and it helps feed that machine. So if anybody is on SNAP or is eligible to apply, a lot of different states and counties have programs like that, which can really help stretch your dollar and be a really great way for you to be able to enjoy more plants. So.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. The more I learn about how to take these systems down, I hear and learn more about returning to those local economies, right? And like you said in the beginning, learning about, wow, we have a global food system, but that's not helping us here. And that's actually really exploitive and XYZ. So I love the idea of bringing it back to community care and really finding out what you can do with the people around you is quite beautiful. Is
Absolutely.
there anything I didn't realize we were running time here, but I also wanted to ask you just about taking care of yourself when doing this work. And I like to hear from guests what they're doing because everyone I talk to is doing something pretty incredible out in the world.
Mhm.
And that is beautiful. And also sometimes you need some love, you need some self-care while you're doing this work. And some of us are still figuring out what that looks like. So what does that look like for you?
That's a really great question. Self care for me has undulated like most humans, and I have too much ego around that I'm definitely not the pinnacle of being able to maintain self-care constantly. Because I think a lot of times we get so invested in what we're doing. That's the first thing for most of us to go. But what I really like to do care is just try to move. When I was younger, it was always about like doing more, like running more miles, or like trying to take on more activities. And for me, at least in this phase of my journey, it's really been more about slowing down and being comfortable not doing something. For me, a big part of some struggle with is that my identity is so attached to producing things or doing something. And I've really had this nothingness.
Enough just as you are, whether you're producing something or not.
Exactly. And being very comfortable with that. And it's not easy for a lot of just flip that switch. It's something that I still struggle with and that I probably will for the rest of my life. So for me, a big part of my self-care journey is how do I slow down? How do I be comfortable with where I am at currently, still look forward to things that I want to do, but know that where I am currently at is perfect because it's the present and that is as good as it's going to get. And meaning that in a very, not just being like, oh, this is it. So very much keeping myself in check, which are dialogues, but mine tends to be quite noisy. So for me, that's a big part of my self-care kind of journey, is figuring out how to calm that when I need to, but also talk to it kindly.
I relate to you. So
it's not easy. We all tell ourselves stories and how we're time that's disruptive or destructive. And we have the ability to change that, but it doesn't feel like it a lot of times unless we remind ourselves that we really do construct whatever we consider to be reality. So that's a big part from, spending time with my husband and just it's both self-care, but also me learning how to do self-care. So,
and we hear in pop culture, right? Like self-care or the restaurant industry, the food industry, like those things don't always go hand in hand. So I'm sure it's an ongoing navigating to being in that world and learning how to take care of yourself. Because I know that for a lot of people in the restaurant, chef industry, anything part of that is that.
And that's the thing is like hospitality industry, I haven't professionally cooked besides the side things that I do like with Edible Ohio in a long time. I've really been in for the past 4 years at Escoffier, and prior to that I was running a teaching kitchen on an farm, and so that was education, hospitality still. But if you're not creating, you're buying, chefs have to be constantly inventing it fresh, which I understand given the market and how things shift so quickly in all of our fields. It's not just hospitality. And I definitely struggle, like most of us experience, if you're a creator of any sort. And then it's just the long hours and the labor that goes behind the actual task of producing or serving food to others. But very similarly, patient or faculty, a lot of students, and they care for them personally. And teaching during the pandemic were very eye-opening because they're sharing with us, and they still share with us personal things that are going on in their own lives and their struggles. And there's a lot of emotional burden that goes on faculty members that I think a lot of times people who don't educate not know. And that also is figuring out where is that barrier? What's my boundary to keep myself safe? And it's difficult for each one of us. What is that line? Like for us, so we can care for other people, whether or not that's educating them or supporting them, whether or not that's your profession or you're just doing it for friends and family, that does not matter. We all need boundaries. So there's been some fascinating between hospitality and then higher education, but it really comes with its own kind of struggles as far as like, how do you find that line? It's difficult.
Share with listeners that I haven't given you space to do. Not a trick question to make sure.
No, I feel like I touched a lot of different topics, and I hope the listeners have something that they can either implement into their own life, or maybe they're thinking through similar topics and hopefully find a similar perspective that they can jive with. So no, I hope everybody enjoyed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. This was really lovely.
Thanks, Carly. It was so awesome to be here and spend some time with you.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share on social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.